Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Cinema Savvy. It is myself, George, and once more by Tayte for another review. We think a spoiler review, and this
Mm.
is, of course, for the Hunger Games, the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Joining Mission Impossible, one of the longest titles of the year in film so far, and the Hunger Games has returned after an 8-year hiatus, I
Has
guess
it
we can
been
call
8
it.
years?
8 years, yeah. But first of all, Tayte, how are we doing today?
I'm doing okay. I'm doing good. Um, I'm going to talk about the film and the film's experience. I want to throw it out there first that I did enjoy the film, but I do want to talk about my film experience as well because
Okay.
I have some gripes with that. But interesting that we're discussing this film. I think earlier on in the year I said that I was watching through the old Hunger Game films, so it's in recent enough memory to go back through the series. And I said at the time it's one of the strongest young adult, if
Yeah.
not the strongest young adult series out there, with actually good direction and actually good acting and actually good, stories and plot lines. I've never read the books, but I'm excited to talk about this film now.
Yeah, and kind of countering that, I'm in the sort of same boat. So we'll get into our thoughts on the Hunger Games, like the originals. I don't know what to call it. It's not. It's not
It's a
really. It's not really been.
pre-sequel.
Yeah. We'll talk about it in a minute because I've got some really fond memories of the series, and I think, yeah, we'll talk about it. But as always, people at home, if you are watching, comment your thoughts on the Hunger Games. We're going to do spoilers. It's a prequel, right? At the end of the day, we know where the story is heading towards. And we'll obviously talk about the Hunger Games, your thoughts on the... it's so weird to say the older films. It's like Star Wars, right? The prequels come sort of a couple of years after. So comment your thoughts on this, the series, if you've read the books, your favourite film or books, that sort of stuff, because it seems to be very different talking Hunger Games with people. And if you want to find out about other videos, because we have released this on Monday, we've had a very, very busy weekend. Our Disney Top 10 ranking video is now up. So thank you to everybody that's checked that one out so far. And obviously, we've had to stagger these off. So there's been a few other new releases. It's been a really busy few weeks. And it's nice to have a sort of blockbuster to end it all with. We've got the Fincher's retrospectives done. We're prepping for a TV series which returns this week, we'll be talking about. But do comment your thoughts on the Hunger Games. And you mentioned I hadn't read the books. If I give a brief history of my time with the Hunger Games, I was a massive fan of these. I say at school, it feels like a cheat to say that because when I think of films at school, I think of films that were with me for the entirety of school, the Star Wars prequels from preschool as in before I was at school to being like 9 years old. Harry Potter's came out when I was in reception and it finished when I was in year 10. Whereas the Hunger Games, the first film came out in year 11. So I say memories of it at school, only for a few months, but I did read the trilogy before the first film came out. And I'm a very big fan of the books. Now, I've not reread them, so I can't sit here and tell you the ins and out of everything. And going into this film, I actually haven't read Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I don't know why. I just didn't buy it when it came out. I think it came out during COVID. And I think there's still a bit of a sour taste in my mouth up to this week with Mockingjay. For the background on that, I was never a fan of that book, bar a couple of things, and I didn't really like the films being sort of split into two and dragged out. But I'm a very big fan of the first two in each, and I'm going to probably pick this book up soon to read. That's my initial thoughts, because apparently it's the longest book as well. And with regards to story, there's a lot to tell with this film. It's not just a Hunger Games, but it is, of course, the first spin-off. As we mentioned, the first prequel book. And I'm not going to put you on the spot, but before we talk about this film, I don't want your thoughts on the Hunger Games, but I want to talk about Lionsgate and give them some credit. And I don't want to make the obvious comparison to the massacre of Fantastic Beasts with J.K. Rowling and Warner Brothers and all that aggro, but Lionsgate have gone on record this month to say they will never force the author to write a book to then make into a film. They'll never force her to write a screenplay. If she chooses to write a new book, then they will be happy for them to turn it into a film. So I should have said Suzanne Collins' name. That's obviously the author of the books, and I think she was always involved with the trilogy, the 4 films, mainly for the scenes. The books are all point of view, so when there were scenes that never had Katniss in, she was involved in writing this, which I always appreciated. But what are your thoughts on Lionsgate doing that? Because I know it sounds really boring and easy, but for me, that's a pretty nice thing to say in this modern few years of franchises being dragged out, grinded out into do everything, do this, and I'll do that.
Yeah.
Whereas Lionsgate are like, you know what, you want to do a book, you do a book, then we'll make it into film. We're not going to make you do it. I like that.
Mean, this year we've talked a little bit about the relationships that various different directors have with movie studios, whether they're positive relationships or abusive, negative relationships, and just the various different kind of ins and outs that the studios have as a whole on the industry, given the writers' strikes and also on the actors as well involved. This is not only just a very nice statement, but it's a step in a positive direction, and other studios should take note. Especially when you've got an IP kind of, and you've developed all of the films through kind of the same studio, and you've been in a good working relationship with one of the writer or the writer of the book. It's good to give back, and it's good to kind of have your faith in that person, and repay that back, and not force anything on them. Not go, we're going to sign you up to like another 4 or 5 films. You must make the books to make those films kind of situations. But instead go, look, we've got a good relationship with you. We understand kind of your own situation. If you do end up writing another book, we'd happily work with you again. We're not going to force you into that or anything like that, but we're going to keep ourselves on good terms, and come back to us if you want to work with us again. It leaves it very nice and open. It isn't forceful, and it allows room for not only this film to breathe, because it hasn't been long since this book's come out, and they've already done a film adaptation of it. But it also, it gives, Suzanne Collins, time to, not just write the next book. There's no pressure on it. There's no deadline. There's nothing kind of tying it down. Like, I know the funny one to go to is George R.R. Martin. When's he going to finish the series so that they can, actually go and do more stuff with the Game of Thrones universe and everything like that. But like with this, it's very much, nice and open, very easygoing, and it's a very good positive working relationship in Hollywood, which you just don't hear about. So I'm fully on board with it.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that. Is that there's 10 years between Bookwise, Mockingjay, and Songbirds Snakes, and it's very interesting that again I know I say it came out during COVID. It obviously wasn't written during COVID. It's not that sort of thing.
No,
and maybe that's one of the reasons why I don't remember it coming out and whatnot, because it would have been an online launch, that sort of stuff. As you said, because it wasn't really filmed, you go back to the Harry Potter films, which are always the obvious example. The books weren't finished when the film started coming out, but obviously they were done in time. But that was a deadline to such. Game of Thrones is a perfect example. The first spin-off they're doing, the story is done because it was in a book years ago. And I've always said, it's a sad criticism, but if George R. R. Martin, my head has always been the criticism. Yes, the showrunners, it did drop the ball. People do like the final series. I believe it's not as bad if you watch them all together. That's what I'm told by newer viewers who didn't watch it like us across the years. But my mindset is if you didn't have this story finished, then you should never have sold the rights in the first place. That's just my actual thoughts. That's not criticism of the show. I say for anything, any series, any film series that want to do that. And kind of the Hunger Games, really, the big thing I remember is the announcement of the book. And I want to talk this before we get into the film. When it came out, it was going to be about a young Snow. I remember I sort of didn't care, but I was like, oh. And in my head, I'd always thought, oh yeah, because the obvious one is to do a book about Haymitch or Finnick or other supporting characters. And really, because I hadn't read it, I knew nothing about it. I not had it spoiled. I haven't had it spoiled to me at all. Obviously, we know Snow ends up being the president. But I went into this film adaptation not having a clue what's going to happen, except President Snow, whereas I didn't know what's going to happen to Rachel Zegler's character, what's going to happen to anybody else we get to meet. And I think that's a really good thing. And full credit to Suzanne Collins, with this being the first spin-off book that she's done of the Hunger Games. It was probably easiest to do other characters, as I've said. But actually, kicking off saying I like this film, I love the fact, I'm not saying, oh, it's a political story. These are young adult novels that have had the best politics, that aren't drawn out, that aren't exaggerated. It's a very bleak black and white. This is the political system these characters are in and what they face. And I believe it's taught at schools now, the Hunger Games, like in English literature at GCSE level, which is really interesting. What I was completely surprised about of this film, which gives me a really good indication of where this conversation might go, I loved not just the world of Panem, but being 10 years after the Hunger Games has begun, it is not the Hunger Games that Katniss Everdeen takes place in. It is not this grandiose show from day one with exotic locations and traps and stakes and this. It is the complete opposite. This film is almost someone bail us out because this is not working. That's the essence of the politics of this. And I love that political backdrop, which actually sets up everything in motion, not just for Snow, But when again we can look at the future and say, here's Katniss Everdeen's story in the capital with the Hunger Games at 74 versus 10. For the first time in my life, I always thought, oh, there's not much to fill in the Hunger Games. But actually, I'm going to sort of take whatever words I've said back and say, you know what? There's plenty to explore across the 64 years if they wanted to, if the story's there, and the story was there for this.
Exactly. This is something that, I mean, I had no context going into this film. I didn't know the books were going to be about snow or anything like that. The only context I had was the trailer coming out. For this series, my relationship has been solely kind of film-based. And I thought it was interesting because he was one of the more intriguing characters, played by Donald Sutherland, in the original films. And he was a character where I always wanted to know more about kind of, what his background was and stuff like that, because it just didn't seem like all the puzzle pieces were there from the films. Like it was like I feel like there's something missing from, maybe it was mentioned in the books, kind of how he rose to power, or just how he ended up in that situation and stuff like that, which was missing, definitely missing. And this film kind of fills in those gaps, and it does a very, very good job of that. And yeah, I want to see more kind of stuff within this universe. They could do loads and loads and loads of different things. I mean, they've got 60 odd years they could fill in from now until Katniss coming in, and there'll always be a love for that kind of original set of films from the franchise. But now they have the opportunity to develop it further, and especially, I mean, we'll talk about it later on in the review, but with the cast, kind of the core cast, if they're able to continue on a few of the characters who will become more poignant and be kept over the years, then you absolutely have a hit on your hands. And it'll be very, very interesting kind of, seeing if they do decide to go forwards and make more stuff, whether it's developed with Suzanne Collins, book or no book. It'd be very interesting to see, as it's her world, and, realistically, she should, have the say in it.
Yeah, and kind of, you mentioned Suzanne Collins. I want to talk about Francis Lawrence, director as well. Directed the other entries in the series, all 4 of them, returning to do this one as well. I think that helped massively. Once again, it's that continuity that, okay, we're in a different era with different casts, but we're still in that same universe. And I think when you do carry over the creatives of that, it does help. And interestingly, talking to some behind the scenes, and now, again, we've not read the book, I've seen some comments line from people saying it should have been split in 2. I've seen comments from others saying it was fine as it was. Francis Lawrence has spoken about this, saying that he wanted it to be one film. And actually, he didn't criticize Mockingjay as such, but he made an implication about the fact that Mockingjay maybe shouldn't have been in 2 parts. Maybe that should have been 1. And we kind of spoke before we went live on this, and this is, I guess, a big thing to kick off this. My thoughts on Mockingjay, I mean, after watching this yesterday, I've watched all 4 Hunger Games films in a day, which is ridiculous in a really good way. But that shows how much I enjoyed this and sort of missed watching those. And watching them grouped was very good, as in for the first time, 1 through to 4, back to back to back to back. I have massive issues still with Mockingjay, that I understand why they split it into post Harry Potter, post Twilight, commercially, but also I don't think you could get away with a 3.5 hour film, which it probably should have been. Whereas today, this film being 2 hours 40, I think is somewhat justified. I know some will struggle with that, but it was really interesting that we've now got to compare today against then. And part of me wondered if Mockingjay was coming out today, let's say the Hunger Games have been done 10 years later, Mockingjay is absolutely one film, and it's 3+ hours. Because again, 10 years ago, commercial audiences weren't sat down watching these longer films, whereas post Endgame, again, Avatar, you've got multi-billion-dollar grossing films with long run times that people they're accepted going to go to, and it's becoming more and more of a thing again in Hollywood now that we get longer films again. And again, I think Mockingjay really, across the 2 viewings, you could probably have trimmed 40 minutes off.
They're the weakest films.
yeah. And listen, I said before, I wasn't a big fan of the Mockingjay book. I love all the District 13 political stuff. Again, it's the politics that are at the heart of the Hunger Games. The realization that the next president is basically the same. Donald Sutherland, fascist, puts himself into power without wanting to give it, wanting to do Hunger Games, etc., etc. I've always loved that dynamic, and obviously end of democracy being born. And I was very crisp, but this one was like, okay, so is this a Hunger Games film or is this a snow film? And after watching the film, it's quite clearly a snow film. And I actually think it's quite brave even calling it a Hunger Games film. And this is really off topic. And I know it's sort of dipping from the schedule, but one thing I've always appreciated the Hunger Games films was you couldn't put them in the Hunger Games 3 times. The concept of, I know in the UK, right, back in the day of Ultimate Big Brother, they'd put all the old Big Brother winners in the back in for one day. That made such perfect sense with the second Hunger Games for it to be a 75th anniversary. This is our way of bringing the politics in. But what the series has never been able to do is how do we put the politics in play whilst they are in the games? And we've never seen that. We've never been able to see that. It's always had to be separate entities. And across this 10-year spell between writing the books, no doubt, Suzanne Collins has been able to perfectly cover, and this goes in terms of the direction as well, how do you play the political game whilst they are inside of the games? And they've done that for the first time. And I actually think there's a massive credit to be due there, that it's not an easy feat. Definitely not. There's no big grandiose build-up. There's nothing like that. But the simplicity of certain moments, certain characters having to play political games whilst the show is ongoing, it's just not been done. It's just not a simple premise. But when they figured that out, I think that massively changes what they could do moving forwards.
It's you're right. It's heavily politically kind of centered as far as the series is concerned. This film is no different from that. And this film does have a Hunger Games take place in it, but it's definitely not the main kind of point of it. It's absolutely not the main point of it. The whole point around it is kind of, the starting of having sponsors, being politically able in the background. It's like watching the original films from Hamish's perspective. It's kind of how much influence can I have on the outside? How can I better my situation? How can I better, her situation in the games? So it's very intriguing. It's like a peek behind the curtain, and it's very conniving, and it weaves very, very well into it. And sure, it is still a Hunger Games film. You do have brutal and violent moments thrown across that political kind of backscape, and you do get the same feeling, especially in that middle section of the film, because the film is split into 3 sections. In the middle section of the film where the Hunger Games actually take place, you do absolutely kind of get, not the gore, because we don't really see much of it, but you do get kind of the violence that comes with the games, and you can fully understand being put into that situation. Which brings me on to my point, and this is going to be a scathing point against people who attend cinemas, because this film is a 12A.
They're loads of kids.
My screening was packed. There were kids that looked like they weren't even in school yet. I'm guessing younger than early years. And it's like, I'm going to go ahead and say it. What are you doing? Why are you bringing kids to this film? Not even as like a young adult novel. I can understand kids in like secondary school going to this, because it's heavy politics, heavy violence, like you got people shooting people in this film. You got people being like beheaded. I know it's off screen, but it's implied. It's a brutally violent film, and it's a brutal kind of setting that delves into like harsh kind of levels of politics. It's not a film for kids.
Yeah.
Why on earth have people brought their kids? It was so frustrating being in a cinema with, and the parents nowadays, what they'll do is they'll stick their kids with like something for them to fiddle with whilst they're, watching the film as well if they get bored. So like midway through the film, I think one person started playing something on someone's phone. It's like, what? I'm sorry, why on earth did you bring them here in the first place? Get a babysitter, like get someone to look after the kid, or go watch it separately if you're parents and stuff like that. And that is a scathing criticism of even the rating. I mean, we don't get 12 films anymore. It's just 12A, isn't it? I mean, that's just, how it goes. But Christ, if there was going to be a film that would be a flat 12 and I'm sorry, you can't bring your adult with you, you've got to be 12 or above, this would be the film. Because there's so much stuff there that merits it and warrants it. And honestly, this is really inappropriate for anyone who's under that age. So even with an adult, it's not worth it, especially when the Mean Girls musical was the one of the trailers played beforehand, and it had swearing in that, and over sexualization, and John Hamm making hilarious comments on condoms and shit. So it's like, know what you're getting into and stuff like that. But no, that's my rant over with the whole But
no, I'm with you, and kind of actually brings me on to last night. I don't know if you've seen this, but the very first rated cut of the Hunger Games was 15. So
yes,
it was a 12A in the cinema, and I remember this is that edgy 16-year-old phase when it came out the day I started college on Blu-ray, and I remember going to HMV, picking up the 15 rated cut of the Hunger Games, and I felt so happy. And watching it again yesterday, after this one, and then going on to watch the others, you forget like, oh god, they really did go for that first film. Like some of the stuff they cut, people's heads being bashed in against the cornucopia, showing the blood, showing kids being mercies, like their throats being slit, their necks being snapped. You forget how brutal it is. And then obviously Catching Fire onwards, it is fully, this is a 12A, this is your adult series.
We get people being stabbed by pitchforks,
Yeah, and it's still very brutal.
Literal piles of bodies, actual piles of bodies.
Yeah. And this is it. And I felt bad. I mean, yesterday I saw this at 12 p.m. showing, so I was meant to do a triple bill at the cinema, just did a double bill. Went straight from The Nightmare Before Christmas into this, which was a bit of tonal whiplash, to put lightly. And there's maybe 30, 40 people. It's the second biggest screen that my cinema has, but I know they're showing it about 20 times a day. So they've been showing it a lot, and it's obviously number one highest grossing film on the weekend worldwide. It's made $99 million off a $100 million budget, which is pretty decent for its opening weekend. Obviously a lot less than Mockingjay Part 2, but also you need to think spin-off. It's also almost half the budget. Its numbers are fine, so people are going to overanalyze that, no doubt, but the numbers tot up. And I just kind of want to give us a bit more credit on what I spoke about. This one was a $100 million budget, and I'm here to once again talk about how dreadful so many of these $300 million films look this year. There are sets being used in this, there are practical sets, there are extras, there are sequences. Of course, there is CGI, like there is in all the Hunger Games films, but it shouldn't have to be so exciting to see a film actually look its budget.
But, I mean, like you said, but I want to just give credit to the kind of camera work and the direction and cinematography of this, because realistically, the sets on this film were fantastic. It looked good. The camera movement in some scenes were excellent. Like
costumes as well, the production design.
Everything looked really, really high budget. So to be done in like a $100 million thing, and I mean, we've talked about the creator to death with how well that's handled, its low budget as well. You don't need a big budget to pull off a nice looking film like that is professional standard. You really don't. And some films, I'm looking at the superhero genre in particular. I'm not going to name studios, but there's two of them which are absolutely guilty of this at the moment, where their budget just overinflates, and realistically, it doesn't need to. It really doesn't, because films like this look better than, the stuff they're putting out there. It's just so unnecessary, but it's a good sign for the industry as well. This is now the second film this year we can point at and go, look, you can do that, guys. You don't need to be putting up, big numbers for the film.
This is my issue. This really quick in the state of the industry is the problem we have right now is that the budgets for the films are growing larger and the audience sizes are decreasing. And what the big studios are failing to understand is that we are not in a new normal post-COVID of audiences. The year of 10 billion, as in 10 $1 billion grossing plus films are gone. That's not happening anymore. It's almost a reset of 10 years. And what they now need to do is start utilizing the spend and the budget costs to then make these films. So that's not ridiculous CGI. That's not changing things left, right, center. And that's on the studios to not suddenly say you've now got half the budget less, but you start thinking practically about cutting costs, about what can they do to save money on the sets, on everything. And that's not cutting crews or anything like that. That is just the simplicity of the storytelling. If you have $100 million budget, don't try and compensate for something that should cost 3 times as much. And again, you mentioned the creator. We've spoken about it a lot. That's the best use we've seen of anybody doing that. For Gareth Edwards to sit there and say it was cheaper for me to shoot on location around the world with a group of 10 than it would be to continue to build sets back at home and CGI them in, there's your answer. Yeah. And I think Hunger Games is similar. There's not many big sets. It's a blockbuster. It's shot on location. It's shot in Poland. It's shot in cheaper places to film in Europe. And basic things such as that are going to help the budget, are going to help spend. And it's really interesting that moving forward, this is going to be a big thing, I feel, the next couple of years of blockbuster films. That they're going to need to try and compensate for this, that we don't know audience sizes, we don't know who's going to turn up. But one thing we can talk about with this, of course, Hunger Games. I mean, we spoke about a little bit of the story, the rise of Snow, split into 3 parts: the mentor, the games, and basically after. Very briefly, quickly, what are your thoughts on the whole, as in, this isn't just the President Snow film. The Hunger Games isn't the Act 2 and Act 3. The Hunger Games is the middle act of the film. Completely different after. Just what are your thoughts on their story choices for this and his character, I guess?
I really liked it. I really liked it. It's been a while since I've seen a film that split itself up in this way and kind of, have three definitive acts that feel very kind of different, but actually tell an overall story. I guess the only one, well, actually, not too recently, Book of Clarence tried to do a similar thing, but I don't think it pulled it off in the same way as this film has done. I was a lot more invested in this film than I was in Book of Clarence. But I just think the development from kind of having him as a mentor, having him kind of showing his origins, almost his beginnings, and, having all of that context put forwards, having that development of kind of the changing of the ways of the games and trying to make it more inventive, and him being the smartest in the class, coming up with his own ideas for how to change it, and that having influence, and then him actually having kind of a heart in the end, or at least, playing somewhere between actually, liking Lucy Gray and, wanting to better his family situation, having that split between the two. It makes the character immediately interesting and complex, and you suddenly have stakes involved. Bringing the games into the second part is obviously the action bit. It's a Hunger Games film. I don't think they'll ever be able to do a Hunger Games film where there isn't a games involved. Like, I wouldn't want to see a film of Katniss like 20 years down the line, unless there's a games involved. Not a chance. And I know that they did it with Mockingjay Part 1 and 2, but I'm considering those two to be attached.
It's the main story, isn't it? It's a trilogy of books.
Of course,
it's
yeah.
the finale.
So I see that as one big entity in that sense. It would be like having a Star Wars trilogy without lightsabers. I don't see it happening. But with the context of this film, having that Hunger Games in the middle means that people get kind of what they want to see, in the sense of, if you enjoyed the films and you enjoyed the Hunger Games, from that side, you get that. But you get all of this political intrigue in the background. You get, other side characters having big moments in this kind of section. And it gives kind of, time to, see the different tributes and how they survived in the arena, how they would have done in Hunger Games when there was less technology involved and everything like that, what it used to be like, but also kind of how political influence can influence in the arena, and, how the conniving and scheming and, how a brain like Snow works. And then the final part, I kind of enjoyed as like a kind of a long epilogue.
Epilogue, yeah.
What happens, after he succeeded? She survived. He kind of won the games, but he lost everything because of it. So now he has to kind of rebuild and start again. And at that point, he's kind of given the choice of, does he try and work his way back to the capital, which we eventually know he does, and he goes on to become the president, not in the film, but, he sets himself on that path. Or could he live the simple life? And that's really the big test of the film. Whereas any other Hunger Games film, the big test is the Hunger Games itself. This film is a true character piece, and I absolutely love it for that. I really, really like kind of how they laid it out in that way and draw you along. I know that certain audiences, people who are there for the action, probably won't enjoy it as much, but, and I was saying this to you beforehand, it's paced really, really well. And going into it, the one thing that we'd spoken about was, oh Christ, that is such a long runtime. Is it necessary? Is it warranted? Yeah. Yes, absolutely. The pacing on this film was so well done. Didn't feel any of the 2 hours, almost 40, that the film ran on for. It really does merit it, really does warrant that kind of length, and it really succeeds because of it.
Yeah, I'm with you on the runtime side of things. That heading into the film, it was something I was like, wait, what? There's a 2 hour 40 long Hunger Games film, and as I said, I hadn't read the book, and I know it's the longest book, which also explains that. But it is always the runtime debate has been a big thing the last month. We've had Napoleon. Well, Napoleon's out on Wednesday. That's 2 hours 40. That runtime, I very much did feel. 3 hour 20-minute Killers of the Flower Moon, did not feel it in the slightest. I've watched 1.5 hour long films this year, which I felt every minute.
Yeah.
and this is it. And it is always about the quality of the film and the story and the script and everything going into it. And this delivered with, especially the 3 parts being split in 3, and by choosing a character, again, like Snow over others. You couldn't have had a 2 hour 40 Finnick Odair or Haymitch film, if I'm being really honest. But this you can with Snow. And the fact his story isn't told it's put him into the place to continue moving. I'm not asking for a sequel. I'm asking for more President Snow books in the slightest, but my interest comes from, I guess this is a prequel thing I'm into, is how do you get from A to B? Where are we with regards to B? B being the Hunger Games, A being this. And there are so many little things, as you touched upon, stuff in the arena where we're going to making it glamorous, making it this. The fact that they imply in this on the arena is it's the same building it has been for the first 10 years. We know later ones it switches every single year. Even the little things like, oh, we get Victor's Village. They win the Hunger Games, become rich, famous, and go back. They either go back to their old life, be rich and famous, or they stay in the capital. Whereas this one is she won and she got chucked back and nothing changed. And I'm really curious to know more in this universe, and however that be through a book or that be through more films down the line or both. That's exciting to me, and that shows there is a story to tell. Yes, the ending is somewhat cheesy when President Snow gets to wear the coats, and that's very, very. How would we say it?
Not fan
I know that
service-y,
Timothy
but,
Chalamet is about to be Wonka, and
yeah,
that looks like it will do the same thing. Like now he's in the coat, that's the coats. I'm fine with that. The fan service stuff, Katniss being a flower, that's the only thing I rolled my eyes at, I'm being really honest. But Primrose is also a flower in the Hunger Games, so it's just a repeat of that. And ironically, it'd be a girl from District 12 that's pissed him off once. And the in-canon story of, we haven't really spoke about it yet, but Lucy Gray disappearing, status unknown. And then apparently in canon it becomes that they eradicated her from the records due to the cheating. That's not explained in this, but who knows what they could do down the line. So I'll say this: the story wise, I'm up for more. If they wanted to do another President Snow book, they more than should, because the thing of political villains is they need to be 3-dimensional. With a 2-dimensional political villain, they just become a parody and 2-dimensional and readable. Whereas Snow is someone, how did this person maintain this power for however many decades? That's always been the purpose. How was he always 1-2 steps ahead of the others? Even having smaller supporting role characters, I mean, we haven't spoken about them yet, but we get to see him delving into the national side of politics with Sir Janice Plinth. But before we get into him and Lucy Gray Baird, I really want to talk about a couple of the capital characters whilst we're still here.
Yeah.
We'll talk about Viola Davis as Dr. Gall. I think I saw the trailer once and I was like, what on earth's going on with Viola Davis? And you know what? I'll take it back. I loved her in this film. Just playing an evil scientist, but actually a threatening evil scientist. The moment you get the lab partner basically stealing the credit and getting killed by the snakes, I loved her character. I thought, is this going to be the wrong type of 2-dimensional? And again, she's not. There's a real nasty edge in there, and the fact really this film ends with Snow working directly under her makes it quite exciting, and she's the head game maker as well for the Hunger Games. What did you think with her? Because I loved her, and we'll talk about Peter Dinklage after, but
she is.
I just thought it would be a ridiculous character, but it's really not.
She is maniacal. She is like mustache twirling. It's brilliant. It's proper hammy, but it works. It's one of those characters where it's like, God,
she's smarter, isn't she?
She's smart, but God, is she crazy? And there's that fine line between the two of them, and it's pure evil. There's no kind of good in there to save yourself from. And it's an interesting character that you can see kind of how she could have very easily corrupted Snow, with Snow trying to, not just win, the prize, but also, he wants to, he wants to kind of save his tribute, and, he goes into that depths and he gets lured in, and you can see that kind of manipulation over the course of the entire film, even to kind of the closing remarks of, oh, you got my attention by doing that in District 12, and he was like, I never intended to, and she's like, yeah, sure. And it makes you kind of start to question, oh, did he intend to do that? Was that his plan all along? Because he seems very comfortable at the very end of the film with his purpose and everything like that. So it does make you re-question those things, and does make you kind of question his thoughts and feelings for Lucy Rose in the film, just because of how good her character is and how well developed it is. And it's the one thing this film does really, really well. It gives time to all of the characters to have their moments and have their room to breathe and develop, which is something that not many films do nowadays. For a cast that, we've got listed about 6 or 7 characters on our kind of, discussion sheet, and every single character has more story given to them, a decent amount of screen time given to them, and just further development, like a lot of development and room for the future for some of them as well. So it's really well put together. And Viola Davis, I mean, she is just a phenomenal actress in the first place. So you're always going to expect a good performance from her. But this is yeah, like I said, mustache twirling the evil, and it works for the film really, really well.
Yeah, and kind of to the Hunger Games' credit across the 5 films, including this, when I don't want to say they've gone for unknowns, because obviously I'm pretty sure Jennifer Lawrence had already been nominated for an Oscar when the first one came out, but it was the back of the Oscar nomination, supporting role in X-Men, lead role in the Hunger Games. That's what popped her to be the A-list Jennifer Lawrence. And what the Hunger Games films have done, whether you want to talk about Joss Hutcherson in terms of however you want, like the Harry Potter films, the ensemble has been, we have the lesser unknown actors as the kids or the tributes, and then we bring in the MVPs to play these smaller supporting roles of those in the capital. Of course, the first one, you've got Woody Harrelson, you've got Elizabeth Banks, Donald Sutherland being brought on board from day one, even Wes Bentley popping up. Then in the sequels, you're ending up people like Julianne Moore, Philip Seymour Hoffman. You've got these incredible names attached to a young adult series, and it is desirable. And it's really interesting that this film once again delivers that. We get Peter Dinklage, who, yes, we know he hasn't been in many films post Game of Thrones. He will always be attached to Game of Thrones. But I loved him in this, the role of Highbottom. The drunkards, okay, we've seen the Game of Thrones, but the creator of the Hunger Games, who's drunk from day one, and you kind of wonder, says, okay, he's got it in for this Snow, a bit Snape-esque, of course, but once you get to that final scene, is that the Hunger Games was a drunken idea, and that his dad then stole the idea and made it real, and it was so barbaric he couldn't comprehend it, and it's his entire life's work now, was creating this thing he never agreed with. You kind of feel sorry for him at that point, and you understand why he hated the Snows, why he did all he could to make sure he's not involved, to give him the weakest person from District 12 to do this and this, and leading up to the moment he's poisoned. And this is, I guess, the power of the story and the performances. I was like, I'm kind of glad he got poisoned, because I do like a good villain rising into power. And again, it puts him in the place to be involved with the game maker stuff. And I think this is what the series really lends itself to, is you bring in these names for these smaller supporting roles. Jason Schwartzman playing Lucky Flickerman. The dad, I think they even referenced he has a son, don't they? Like they've got a baby.
Yeah.
And of course, Stanley Tucci, it would make sense that his dad is basically a Wes Anderson MVP, right? That he's perfectly cast, and he's in it for a couple of scenes, and he's very funny, like Stanley Tucci. And I just think and it's these things that I've really missed the series, and not to slag off Harry Potter as such, but it's such a shame that Fantastic Beasts ended up being the way it was, that it wasn't just Fantastic Beasts, one film and done, then go and do a separate Grindelwald trilogy entity. But the reality is that J.K. Rowling didn't bother to write the book, and sort of went off against her own canon in the desperation of making films. Whereas again, Lionsgate, they've been patient. They've let Suzanne Collins write it. All these actors, I don't know whether they've read the book, but the book is out there for them to read before they're cast. And I think that makes a difference with films like this. They know what they're signing up for, these actors too. They're not going to be locked in for a franchise for God knows how many years. And I absolutely love the cast for it. I know that's more of an overview, and I've took a couple of names there. But before we talk about the main ones, I'll say, do you have anything to say on those ones I mentioned too?
I mean, yeah, Peter Dinklage is perfectly cast into this role, purely for kind of, being that drunkard character who has it in for, another character. But then actually in, like you said, that last revealing scene, he is a very tragic character. And, Snow has really been the downfall for him. And, it's also put him in the position that he's in, but he kind of regrets every single moment. You can tell that's the case. So, having that hanging over him, really good kind of, I know this is down to Suzanne Collins and her writing, because I'm sure that would have been, in the books as well, but Peter Dinklage brings that to life, and he does a very good job of that. And he's always great on screen. He will always put in a good performance. And like you said, it's great to have such a good kind of seasoned surrounding cast and just let the young people shine. And your comment about kind of Harry Potter and, Fantastic Beasts and Grindelwald, and you just wish that Fantastic Beasts was not just kind of as well developed and as well kind of character based as this film has been for the franchise straight away, but also I wish it was a bit more mature for kind of
Yeah,
what it gave out.
should
I
have
mean,
been.
we
Grindelwald
got
should have been like.
we got 3 films out of that. I know that like I can only really remember 2 of them, but there were 3 films in that franchise, and realistically, there's better development in the 2 hours 40 in this film for some of the minor characters than there is for the main characters in that series. That's crazy. Like that's a sign of good writing, but it's also a sign of good actors around it. And I'm not saying that the actors in Fantastic Beasts weren't good, but given the material they've been given, it's like wow, how kind of suppressing
It's
and
wasted the actors, isn't it?
absolutely wasted,
and
absolutely wasted.
and this is kind of like Michael Arndt co-wrote the script. Michael Arndt's one of the most successful writers, done a lot of big blockbuster films, done smaller films. I'm not criticizing. And we spoke about Gungor recently, right? Where the
Yeah.
author made the jump to writing the screenplay, and Finch was fine with that, and they were involved from day one together. Project, I've forgotten her name. And it's interesting with this that Suzanne Collins is clearly involved, but very much a background that I've wrote the book. Now this is for you guys to adapt, and I'm guessing she'll help out in the background should they need it. Fantastic Beasts is its own failure, and I do always wonder, without just blaming J.K. Rowling for all of it, Warner Brothers, I think, are equally to blame. Pressuring for a Harry Potter series. I'm still completely convinced it was a plan for one film. It ended up spawning. The original plan was, well, it was one film, then it was, now we're doing a series of 5, and Fantastic Beast is actually the backdrop for Grindelwald. Like, wait, what? Like, Grindelwald, the evil Hitler of the Wizarding World, set in 1945, is now being set up in 1920 with Eddie Redmayne being the Beast Collector. Like, how does that ever work? And there are so many lessons to be learned from varying factors of that series.
Fantastic. I mean, okay, if we're going for that franchise, Fantastic Beasts should have just been a film on
One
its
film,
own,
and
and
it's
then there
fine.
should have been,
A
and then there should have
lovely
been a
family film.
Grindelwald setup
trilogy
after that.
And
And
with the
they
Grindelwald
could
stuff
take
was
that
done
on
in the
board
books.
with
Yeah.
this film. They could absolutely take that on board and have this as
Too late
this is
now.
the snow film. This is the snow
Yeah.
film. We're going to do this. If we're going to set up any other characters that we want to develop further, if we want to show the Dark Days as part of a film, or we want to kind of, show a set of very interesting Hunger Games where a possible uprising happened and Snow had to put it down, do that as a
Yeah.
separate series. Do that as like further down the line, but don't have it as attached to this film as you need it to be. But this film knows exactly what it is from the start, whereas it seems like the Harry Potter franchise, and I know we're going to be talking about the Harry Potter franchise a lot in this review because it's the
It's hard
best
not to, right?
comparison. It's the best
Yeah.
comparison for you kind of young adult kind of films adapted and stuff like that. This film knew exactly what it needed to be. It knew exactly what it needed to be. And the way it was presented allows you to attach yourself to that character from the start, and there's no distractions. It knows it's about Snow. It knows it's about the political intrigue of how he rose to power from almost nothing all the way up through, basically carrying his own name through the mud, and the 3 different stages of it. Top graduate in stage 1, and then having to fight and scrap, like actually physically get his hands dirty in stage 2, and then his final kind of descent when he's given kind of the choice and option in stage 3 where, he pretty much becomes a murderer and, kind of is given that chance to seize the power and he takes it. It's one of those films where it kind of sets itself up really, really well from the start, gives you the origins, and yeah, you can develop it further if you want to. You also have the option to not, and it's perfectly fine as it is.
Yeah, I'm with you. And let's talk Lucy Greybeard, played by Rachel Zegler. Again, President Snow. He's got a family in the first film, and I'll say this before we talk about any story. I mentioned this film hadn't been spoiled to me. I knew nothing heading into this. I just knew Rachel Zegler's playing the girl. That's the tribute. I didn't even know he was going to be a mentor. I was like, wait, did Snow go in a Hunger Game as well? Like, I was so cold going into this in terms of knowledge. It was weird because I've read all the other books, so I knew everything heading into those, whereas nothing about this has been as interesting an experience. And that's one of the reasons I was trying to catch up. But without summarizing it with the final scenes, the Rachel Zegler side of it, knowing that President Snow had fallen for someone, again, he's got a family in the Hunger Games, but knowing that essentially everything that stemmed from leading into rebellions and whatnot, the political game is all in District 12 from where Katniss was. The fact that it was not just like a girl in District 12, but there are similarities between the games and where the series would go on to be and where it isn't. And the fact that really he's had it in for Katniss because no doubt when that name was pulled out from day one, okay, it's very Star Warsy, prequely, saying
Mm.
Katniss, a plant. Do you know what it reminded me of? In The Hobbit, when Legolas is it Legolas? Is like, I've heard that there's a
Oh,
ranger in the east. I'm going to go and find him. And they basically say everything except the word Aragorn.
yeah.
And it's like, this. What's this plant? The plant is a Katniss, and it ended up being his downfall with his relationship with Lucy. Listen, I'm fine with that. It was silly. I rolled my eyes, but the essence that everything stemmed because she betrayed him. And
Mm.
without jumping to the end, because it's unfair and to talk about her final moment of the film, because it's an out of blur. The fact that he does not know if he killed her, the fact he will never know if he killed her, she was never ever seen again, she was never found, I think so interesting because obviously the film ends with Donald Sutherland quotes too, but the fact that that would have been on his mind his entire life, his entire political career, is all from that moment of, was he betrayed or was he not betrayed? We will never ever know. And I love that. And I think that makes Snow so much more interesting as a character because,
Mm.
as I said, I went and watched the 4 films after. And when you learn more about him as the latter films go on, he's very fearful of a lot of things. You see all of that in this. And I want to give massive credit to Tom Blythe's performance as Snow. I've not seen him in anything before. I know he's the lead actor. It is his film. But because I hadn't seen him in anything, Rachel Zegler's been all over the marketing. I know that they got a waiver just before the SAG strike finished, which was the sign that was the strike was nearly done. But again, the moment that button went, as Rachel said, all the red carpets everywhere. But their dynamic together was great. But I loved the character of Lucy Greybeard. And there are murmurs that she's related to Katniss. It's more theories online. The theory is that she is the cousin of Katniss's grandparents, which there's like stretching at theories, and there's that. But I love the fact it wasn't, oh, it's Katniss's like nan in a couple of years. Like it is a separate entity, and I really, really liked her story, her persona. I think Rachel Zegler. Listen, there's all the Snow White stuff kicking off, massively exaggerated kicking off. I think the official photo from the film. I don't know if you saw the dreadful fake image that went around a few months ago of
Mm.
7 actors on a hill that went through the Daily Mail, which is all we needed to know, with an actress that clearly wasn't Rachel Zegler filming Snow White. That's kicked off what is this insane Snow White PR. I might not agree with what Rachel Zegler said about the whole, it's been 80 years, blah, blah, blah. And I get it. I'm more, if I'm honest, my concern of Snow White is that there's an insane Zionist in Gal Gadot playing the lead villain, not Rachel Zegler playing Snow White, and that's what people should be talking about. But this film utilized her perfectly. I don't care for Snow White because I don't care about the Disney live action remakes. As I said, the photo looks awful. It looks like the Polar Express. But I like Rachel Zegler. I loved West Side Story. I think she was fine in Shazam. I think she's got a big career ahead of her. And she is very, very young. And people need to realize that when this is like a 21-year-old being thrust into all the cameras, doing all PR by herself, and they're playing games, it's not as favourable. But her in a film like this, I thought she was perfectly suited for the Hunger Games.
She is amazing. She is an absolute star, and she hasn't really given a bad performance yet. It's one of those where we're watching kind of the rise of someone, and for them to go and take her from West Side Story and go, okay, they offered her the role, she declined it originally, and then she kind of changed her mind on it. So I'm wondering what changed her mind on this film and what kind of made her think, okay, I'm going to take it. But she played it so well. And it's quite big shoes to fill, being the female lead of a Hunger Games film, because you're following in the footsteps of Jennifer Lawrence, who's gone on to be an amazing kind of star as well in her own right. But she absolutely captures the screen whenever she's on it. She is that kind of level of innocence, but then that innocence kind of turns throughout the entire film. You are left with the question at the end of the film: did she betray him or not? And we'll always be left with that question. And it's the fact that we kind of see her innocence throughout the film, but we also see her, kill people, and we see that kind of side of her as well. It's one of those where you see that character develop throughout the film, and she's able to portray that kind of innocence turning sour, and we will never know the true depths of it. And it's a good kind of character trait if you don't fully kind of reveal everything from the character, but it leaves people guessing, but not in the sense of, I have no idea of what I've just watched. It's more of like, oh, I want to see more of what I've just watched. It's it's good in that sense. And, her singing voice will be utilized throughout Hollywood. She'll be cast into other musicals outside of, Snow White and West Side Story. And, she will become that person who will be put into musicals in the future. And I absolutely see kind of herself being put forward for almost everything, going forwards musical wise. But to have not just the singing voice being utilized in this and have her, actually sing a lot of songs, which I'm assuming the book, they probably make mention of the fact that she, sings a lot and, has a band and everything like that. But, it's great. It becomes the emotional heartbeat of the film, all the way through to the kind of final words stated, It plays off really well. And her on-screen chemistry, I want to say, is better than any of the on-screen chemistry between any characters in the previous Hunger Game films. I believed this.
With you.
I believed this straight away, and they just got on really well.
Yeah, I think this sounds really horrible because I don't want to criticize the 4 films from.
I don't like Peter. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. And I've been criticized before by people who like the Hunger Games franchise. I don't like Peter as a character or as a love interest.
It's not as much a love triangle as Twilight, which is credit to the book. I don't mind Liam's Hemsworth in it, but the film's taken a direction where it's very clear that it's her and Peter. But I am with you, and I think the difference we have there, and this sounds really unfair, this isn't my intention to Hemsworth or to Josh Hutcherson. I mean, Josh Hutcherson's just been in 5 Nights at Freddy's. You have a generational talent with Jennifer Lawrence. And Liam Hemsworth, I'm not saying his career has declined since those, but I would say the pair of them have very much gone the Taylor Lautner side of the young adult films than the Lawrence / Patterson / Kristen Stewart side of it. And, I'm not to talk about people's private lives. Obviously, Rob Patterson and Kristen Stewart were a thing when they made Twilight. That obviously carried through the Harry Potter cast about growing up as siblings. The one thing I've always said about the Hunger Games, and I was thinking this again yesterday, it was almost too quick, which is not a criticism, but it might be the reason as to why it's different now that there were 4 films across 4 years. They nailed it. 2012, 2013, 14, 15, done. It wasn't dragged out across... I mean, I understand Harry Potter being 10 years different, much bigger scale films, different films, what cast growing up, etc., but the Hunger Games almost went by like a flash. Like, if you weren't there, I can't... I mean, I know that they do it at school now, like it's on the curriculum, which isn't the case when we were at school. It just come out, but the fact it's on the curriculum, it has a different kind of legs now to what it does then. And it does make me wonder, even looking at the box offices back then, that Hunger Games 1 was a massive hit, 2 was the peak, and then 3 and 4 just steadily declined box offices. Yes, 1 came out a few weeks before Star Wars 7, which was very dumb. It's like because it was a blur. It was, and because they haven't padded it out with books, its status in pop culture wasn't of Harry Potter or Twilight, but it never needed to be. It was a far different series, and it does make me think that with this slightly less audience box office opening weekend figure now, which is a number, again, with Circuit I'm fine with, you're fine with, it's going to be fine financially. Because it hasn't... what I'm trying to say is it hasn't milked itself.
No.
It's not been milked as a franchise, so yes, it might have dwindled somewhat, but there are going to be fans there, and it's going to be people our age or people younger who are going to be going back saying, I remember when these came out when I was younger, and they're going to go and watch the new one. And there might be a new younger audience going to watch these as well, who will then go on to watch the others. And I just found it really interesting with the Hunger Games that you kind of mentioned it's the most comparable to Harry Potter. I can never really compare the two. I can, but I can't. Like, in terms of quality, the Hunger Games is 3 books, and it's a pretty phenomenal trilogy. It's 4 films, which function great as 4 films. But because it was never more than that, and again, the books came out 1, 2, 3. Each year went by. It wasn't like Harry Potter with huge midnight launches. It's really interesting that, unlike the Maze Runner, which I think didn't finish, right? And there was the other one, Divergent.
It did finish. Maze Runner did finish in the end. Divergent never finished because the films got terrible. Well, they were not the best in the first place, but Maze Runner is an interesting comparison because I
saw the first one. I haven't seen any of us. I saw the first one.
I liked the Maze Runner films, but they did the whole kind of split
Yeah, they dropped off. And
Yeah,
I
they
think
dropped off, and they had problems with production of the final film, and it was delayed, and there was injuries, and then it just kind of dropped
yes,
silently. And I wasn't a big fan of the ending, and it was a bit like, oh well, that was a waste. The first two films were decent, at least. But it's one of those where it's like that had really good potential, good setup, and then it dropped off. But they could always revisit that universe because that universe was very open. Same with this,
they can.
this
And
is
this is
even
it.
more open.
There's a concrete 74-year history of this universe, and
Mm,
there's stuff in these that they. I mean, again, I'm stretching, but District 12 when Katniss is around, it is outlawed for anyone to be allowed to sing in that district.
mm.
And obviously,
I
in
wonder
this
why.
film, I would exactly right, and that's what I've liked. And again, I'm not trying to get on the Suzanne and Connor's hype train and be like, "Go do this, go do that, go do that." The world is your oyster. If she has a story to tell, tell it. If she has an in-depth history of Panem somewhere, maybe she's not released it because she wants to then use that to tell stories. Like George R. R. Martin, to his credit, I think halfway through the History of Westeros book he did, the King's one, which is what House Dragon is. The fact he'd meticulously detailed the history through a very untrustworthy point of view, which is genius to adaptation standing points. But the fact he did that is credit to his world. The issue there is that he didn't actually finish his actual book series. He's just got excited by the past rather than finishing the present. I'm kind of like the Hunger Games, that the world itself that is rich of story, idea, concept, politics, tragedy, the environment. The capital is not the same capital as 75 years later. I'd love to see more of that. The fact that there hasn't really been a stylist, the tributes are dumped in the zoo for people to come and have a look at. Whereas later on, they're celebrities. They're this year's in thing. And I thought there's so much to explore, and this film does such a phenomenal job of not just that stuff, but wanting more because it's so stripped back to its bare bones. That's a credit to this film, to the direction. I know I'm way off point of where the schedule was.
Well, no, I was going to say no. Even with like kind of going more in depth into that, you can tell the universe has been built out, and even with this film, there are so many kind of little details. Like you said, the zoo, kind of like how different it is from the Hunger Games that we'd seen previously and stuff like that. The fact we don't have career tributes at this point, and
Yes.
that it's literally just an absolute fight to the death of these people. It's only really televised, and not many people are watching. But this is the first year that made people watch, and the development of that.
I'd want to see the next year. I'd literally want to see the 11th
because
Hunger
the
Games.
spectacle would probably just jump up,
Yeah.
especially if Snow's a games maker at that point and has his little kind of whispering influences and begins his kind of
Political
ascent
career
in
as well,
that
isn't it,
way.
at the same time.
How long until, I'm sure he does this at some stage, how long until he ends up killing Gaul, and we see that and stuff like that, and he really seizes the power in that sense. It sets so much groundwork and bedding, and it's so well put together. And that is not just we've been gushing over it. That's a credit to the writing to start off with, and it's good to kind of credit the writers in that sense. But it's also good to credit everyone involved in the film, because they all played their part. No one played a bad role or anything like that. We haven't even talked about we've talked about Snow the character, but Tom Blythe the actor, fantastic job. I've not seen him in anything before, but really,
He looks like Eminem.
hopefully.
Sorry, I couldn't shake it. The final third, I was just sat there like Slim Shady. And then you know what though? Because of his blonde locks, I just kept thinking, I was like, wow, they really fucked up Grindelwald, didn't they? Because this, again, it's the blonde hair, evil villain origin story, great coat at the end of the film, everything. But Eminem stuff, I just kept laughing. I'm so sorry. The dog tags and everything.
He plays it really well. He plays it really well. Throughout all three different phases, we get to see that transition, and even towards the end, where he's just shooting mockingjays in the forest, you can tell like that insanity has taken him over. That kind of he has no trust anymore, and he can only trust himself kind of attitude. He's betrayed the world, but the world is kind of betraying him back, kind of thing. It's really, really well developed, and once again, like he plays it so well from the start of the film to the end of the film. And I already mentioned that he sold me on the love interest in this film, and he sold me on that relationship and that kind of slow burn. And in the end, that love was only very fleeting. We don't really get to see it properly fully blossom. We just kind of get to see kind of the sparks of it, and then the sparks kind of die out, and we're left with that kind of did she betray him, didn't she betray him, kind of, was he just being crazy, was he just being it's fascinating that it's played in that way, and it's just really well done.
and it does what a prequel should. It builds the universe, it builds existing characters, and it puts them in ways moving forward. That the way this film ends as well, it is, as you said, it's that everything's fits into place for his ascent to the top, but he hasn't arrived at the top at the end of this film, so that leaves us wanting more, and that's how I felt. And without sort of jumping too far, I want to ask before I actually ask this about favorite scene. I've got a quote here by Suzanne I've been looking for. That's what the article I read the other day. She basically put, here's how it works. I have two worlds, the Underland, which is a River book series, and Panem. I use both of them to explore the elements of a just war theory. When I find a related topic that I like to examine, I then look for the place it best fits. The state of nature debate of the Enlightenment period lent itself into a story centered on Coriolanus Snow. Sorry. Now, I like that because that's showing that Suzanne Collins is looking at real life side of things. For that's then impact the story moving forward, and it does make me again wonder with this is there is more potential. And again, the Ballad of Songbirds Snakes, it wasn't this big hyped up, I'm writing a new Hunger Games book, here's my annual update, like Game of Thrones. I'll finish it this year, they said, for 10 years in a row. It's the opposite. It was the book was written, then they announced it, right? It was literally simple as that. There was new Hunger Games. And maybe there is loads of stuff in the background. Maybe she's working on 2, 3 and leave it to it. If it's working for her, it's going to work for us, and it will work for whenever the time comes for it to be on film and TV. And kind of saying that where I am, before we get into favorite scenes, I want to talk about Francis Lawrence again on direction. That I know people criticize the Harry Potter films for sticking with. I always get the Davids mixed up. One's the producer, one's the director. Both begin David H.
David Yates.
David Yates. Why did I say? Sorry, David Heyman, producer. David Yates. Harry Potter's a very different entity because there were 5 directors, and then the consistency came in at a latter point where everything else has been built up by the directors. I think Francis Lawrence has almost a job for life where if he wants to do a Hunger Games film, just keep bringing him back. I'm sure there are other talented directors.
It's very interesting because he didn't direct the first film.
Francis Lawrence did.
No, Gary Ross directed the first film.
Oh, my apologies. Did he do 2, 3?
He did 2 onwards.
Right. Okay. Was he involved in the first one? I thought he was credited for it still.
I'm not sure.
That's embarrassing.
Was there a changeover in director? I'm not sure.
They definitely did swap it. Ignore me. 4 of the 5 films of the Hunger Games series. Okay, ignore me. But and you know what? That explains why we didn't have ridiculous, over the top
violence in the following films. It became more politically focused, and
it's the shaky.
Yeah, the shaky cam left, and you can tell the difference between the films. No, I get it. But yeah, no, he is. This could be his franchise now, which is fascinating because I did some digging. I wanted to see what else he directed, and other than films like Water for Elephants and stuff like that, he's directed some of the most recognizable music videos of all time. He directed Bad Romance. He's directed for Backstreet Boys. He's directed for Green Day, Jennifer Lopez. He's directed for Shakira. He's directed for, Aerosmith, Don't Want to Miss a Thing. He's directed for Wycliffe Jean, Whitney Houston, Destiny's Child, Janet Jackson, Britney Spears, Alanis Morissette, Pink, Will Smith, Avril Lavigne. He did Skater Boy. His background is in music videos, which is fascinating because this year we've been focused on a director, or this half of the year we've been focused on a director who's gone from making music videos into making films. And the transition was very different for Francis Lawrence because he's kind of the last music video he did was Beyonce Run the World, which was back in 2011, and since then he's been focused purely on Hunger Games, and I mean he did Red Sparrow as well in there, and a few other different things. Yeah, he's done a lot of work with Jennifer Lawrence because he's done a Dior advert with her and stuff like that, but it seems like he's got a good working relationship with Jennifer Lawrence, but also he's got a very good working relationship with this kind of style of film. And he's definitely kind of honed in his style over the years. And I know we're going to get onto favorite moments first and stuff like that. And we've talked about future Hunger Games across the board here. I'm going to make the bold statement that, from the films I've seen so far from the Hunger Games, this might be the best put to film. Just overall, how it's been packaged. I know that some people would prefer the story of the original Hunger Games and stuff like that, but I really like the in-depth character work they do here. I love, the evolution of the camera work. I love the backstory. I love the acting in this film. I think it's the strongest overall. Now, whether it's my favorite or not is a different question, but I definitely think that the progression throughout the films, he's learned his mistakes, and of course, Suzanne Collins would have gone back and kind of, okay, I understand what I did with Mockingjay. People weren't completely clicked onto that, so I know what I need to do here. But it seems to be completely put together in this film, and I think this is the best version of a Hunger Games film we've seen so far. People can have their favorites, but that's my opinion on kind of overall how I feel about it.
I kind of agree with you to an extent. I think for me personally, I've got Catching Fire #1 still. But it's very similar in the mindset, right? That when I'm looking at these films, the series, I'm looking at a combination of the politics alongside the actual story and the characters. I know the story is political, but it's like the Harry Potter films. Harry Potter films, books maybe more, touched upon the politics a lot more at the same time. Can't put that into film, especially for a Wizarding school when they're 700-page books being condensed into a 2-hour film, which makes it harder. Whereas the Hunger Games, that's why I'm really curious to read this book. I'm going to not buy it to read, but what I'm curious by sort of moving forward with this story is that tangent of we've seen the combo of politics at the same time as the arena. Now I'm sat here begging for the 11th Hunger Games, but I've got Catching Fire #1 still just because I think it's the strongest overall in terms of the because the first third of that film is the politics. It's the tour, it's the victory tour, it's the games. Because once they go in the arena, they're not allowed to do that. Whereas this is what I was saying about this one. This one, you can now finally do both of those together. And I quite like that. I really quite like that. And I'm curious. I'm with you. I think what I have, I don't really do star reviews, but on Letterboxd after this marathon, this 1 and 2 are all 4 stars. I've tagged as on my Letterboxd, and I put Mockingjays as 3-star each. I don't do star ratings, but if
I do on my Letterboxd, and funnily enough, I also gave this a 4-star.
Yeah,
so
because
we're on the same page with it.
Yeah, and it's kind of how I feel this series. It's a very, very solid young adult series, and it's a very solid series of films. I just think, again, Mockingjay, and I like the fact that, again, the direction it was I'm glad this isn't a 2-parter. I don't, because if it was a 2-parter, it's going to be like maybe not Mockingjay, but Catch Fire, but it would be a cliffhanger inside the arena, and that wouldn't compensate the second half of the story. And I don't think the first half builds up to that. That I'd rather this was the first entry in a President Snow trilogy if they really wanted to.
The only way I feel like they could have split it in 2 is if they finished with the Hunger Games and finished with him being sent to the districts, and then spent more time building up that relationship and actually showing the length of time he was in the district. Because as much as I kind of loved that element of the film as like a long
epilogue, clear how long it goes on for.
It's not clear for how long it goes on for, and you could really kind of build in that time of him having to go through the training, him being mistreated, him having to kind of rechange his identity and try and start a new life again, having pretty much every opportunity ripped away from him knowing he's never getting back to the capital, having him have that realization, and then seeing Lucy Gray again for the first time, really building into that and kind of having that as kind of the middle of the film, and then kind of the betrayal towards the end and him working his way back to the capital as kind of the final point. Yeah, that's the only way. The only part you could lengthen is the final part.
The epilogue, yeah. And I don't think that warrants being a film.
No, it doesn't.
And I don't want to do the boring, be a TV show. No, this series lends itself to film.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of, I mean,
if they want to do like I'll pitch it out there. If they want to do like a Black Mirror-esque thing with the Hunger Games where they just show random, like 1 hour kind of not films.
Watching a highlight show of 24 children kill each other.
1 hour. I'm just going back through the history of the Hunger Games of like, have, one
Stanley
of the
Tucci doing it.
Have one of the Flickermans present it. It'd be hilarious. And then just going through the highlights of that Hunger Games, how the arena was different, what the tributes were like, a bit of background on them, and then doing it like a sports show. That'd be fantastic.
That's literally what that Game of Thrones history book is, which is really good. And that's now literally 200 pages from that are going to be a 4-season series now.
Exactly.
Which is remarkable. But and that's kind of it. Yeah. I mean, I want to ask, do you have a favourite scene without jumping too far?
My favourite scene, I really like the connection moments between Snow and Lucy Gray. Their relationship is a big part of the film, and I really liked the quiet moments that they had together in the kind of scenes, whether it's him visiting her at night and giving her the poison in the zoo and kind of almost kissing, but not really, and him kind of having that affection and, just those moments. The other kind of moment, which I kind of wish was a little bit more, the only moment would have been seeing Sejanus outburst, because I saw it in the trailer and I thought, oh, this is going to be a big moment. And the only thing I would have hoped for was a bit more of that, a bit more outspokenness. But yeah, no, that was probably my favorite scene, just the quiet moments of this film.
It's really hard, picking a favorite
Can
scene.
I just pick? I mean, the epilogue was my favorite section, if that makes sense.
Yeah, favorite act.
Mm.
Favorite scene is tricky. I really like the first time we meet the snakes, and it's not only the traditional setup of here we go, this is clearly going to be a part of
Chekhov's
something later
snake.
on. But it's the moment when you realize that Viola Davis' character is just not some crackpot. Like, she's serious, she's nasty, but she's smart. She's not taking credit for what Crying Slow's been doing. She knows fundamentally this was clearly him the entire time, and now I'm gonna make an example out of this girl that's jumped the gun. I absolutely loved that scene, and that's what the series really is good at doing, is not just making these horrible villainous characters. They never feel two-dimensional, that she's probably ended up there because of something that's happened to her in her life. And I like that they go into that. And another scene, and maybe a morbid, just really child, is the death actually of Sejanus, the pleading, screaming his mum's name before he goes on the noose, because it's what Snow said. The reality is that you get bailed out by your parents every single time, and at some point that's going to stop him. It's a brutal scene, but just that moment where the realization kicked in. I don't want to say I loved it, but that had a pretty big impact. It's probably a better way of saying it than saying it's a favorite scene. But yeah, we haven't spoken about last thing I say. Josh Andrew Riviera, I thought he was great in this film.
He was good, yeah.
Again, the character Janice, I liked it. Your family got rich because they profited from all this happening. You might be liberally minded in theory, but the reality is that you're not going to make any difference at all because you're just rich. That's it. You've not been through it. And I really like his character as that sort of, he is the moral high ground, but he is like a Ned Stark type. He's too naive to be involved in this political game, and that's why he's the first one out. But yeah, I mean, my final thoughts, I've really enjoyed this film. It's been a weird day watching 5 Hunger Games films in theory. But it's nice to go back to it, to watch them all together. Chronologically, watching this, then the 4 follow-ups, there's loads of little things from this. And again, I mentioned the Katniss rolling my eyes thing. There's nothing else as ridiculous as that. And I don't think it's that ridiculous, but
yeah.
Yes, the Hanging Tree song sung that, but I like the fact that that's a famous song in the Hunger Games, and we now know the origin of to why that song was famous was because of Lucy. And there are little.
We actually get to
that.
see the Hanging Tree for once.
Yeah. And it's just it's a great return to Panem, and I hope this isn't the final time that we return there, whether via book or film or series. I think the future's bright. Should they want it to be.
There is more to explore there, and I completely agree. My final thoughts are: good film, go and watch it. Go and watch it in cinemas. As long as there aren't, kids along as well. Parents, if you're here, don't take your kids to see this film.
Yes, it's 2 hours 40 as well. So make sure that the right time's not a problem.
Christ.
Because people all moan, but just someone went out to the loo and it was the hanging scene of Sejanus. It's like, you picked a really bad scene to go.
Yeah.
or with the mayor's daughters, another person left the room as that bit kicked off. But yeah, plan it strategically. But aside from that, that's going to round out this review. We've gone over an hour, which I didn't think we would, which is pretty great. It shows how much we've been able to talk about this. There's a lot of things happening on the channel. This video has been pre-recorded. We've got the Disney video going up, which would have been yesterday. We've had Napoleon reviews, Scott Pilgrim Takes Off reviews, Christ Almighty, Blue Beetle 4K, Brawn GP. There's been a lot of stuff on the channel the last couple of weeks. There's still new releases. Wish releases this Friday, the 22nd, 24th. Napoleon's out this Wednesday, the 22nd. There's films coming out of the cinema. We've got a Godzilla film in the next couple of weeks in the United Kingdom. I think we get it mid-December. Wonka. It's going to be a busy few weeks. We're heading into Oscar season. There's a lot of stuff we're working on. But the big one, Tay, I'm handing over to you, is a little TV series celebrating an anniversary.
Yes, so welcome to Doctor Who Week. We're going to be talking about Doctor Who this week. We've got a plan in place to have a run through the kind of areas of New Who, have a quick discussion about kind of, the series since Russell T Davies took over. I know we've had multiple showrunners since then, but we'll go from kind of when Russell T Davies took over all the way through to right now. And then as of this Saturday, we're going to be talking and discussing the new episodes. So we have the Star Beast out this Saturday, 6:30 UK time. We've then got afterwards the Doctor Who Unleashed or Confidential. I know it used to be called Confidential, but we'll be watching that as well. And then at some point, which we're going to discuss kind of a time, we'll put it up on our socials a little bit later on, after the episode and the Unleashed has released, we will be discussing it on the day. So please keep an eye out for those. We're going to go through every single episode and have our immediate reactions on it and have a good old Who discussion, because it's time that this channel gave a bit of love to Doctor Who. It's probably my favourite TV series of all time. And yeah, I'm really, really excited to talk about it. I'm really excited that it's going to be less than a week until it's back.
Definitely celebrating 60th anniversary. David Tennant returns. Russell T Davies returns. It's going to be a big one. So people do get involved if you like that. As I said, we'll put details on social media: linktree.com/cinemasavvy, Facebook, Twitter, Letterboxd, Instagram. They're all on there. So we'll announce it there. We've got artwork done ready for it. So yes, that's going to do it for this review. Again, Tate, thank you for coming on. It's great to talk the Hunger Games. It genuinely has been. I'm going to go read this book when it comes the next day from Amazon. And we'll see you all on the next one. Take care.